Hello, my name is Keith Gutstein, and I'm an executive board member and board secretary at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center on Long Island. Every year around the January 27th, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, pays tribute to the memory of the victims of the Holocaust and reaffirms its unwavering commitment to counter anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of intolerance that may lead to group-targeted violence. The date marks the anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi concentration and extermination camp of Auschwitz and Birkenau.
Thank you, Keith, and we'd like to welcome all of our schools, and we're so excited to also have schools in Canada, the OJCS school, so thank you. Our first survivor, who again is turning 99 years old, we'd like to first wish a happy birthday to Anita Whitesport. Anita, born in Vienna, experienced Germany annexing Austria and was sent on the Kindertransport to England as a child.
My name is Anita Whitesport. I was born in Vienna, Austria. I had a wonderful childhood. Here is a picture of my family, loving parents, brothers and sisters. I had a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and friends. I loved my school. Vienna is a beautiful city. We went on vacation. This year is a school outing, and that's the last picture I took before I left. Everything was beautiful. Jews lived in Austria for hundreds of years. They were pillars of the community and had a wonderful life. We lived very well, went on vacations and had everything a child needs until Hitler had the Anschluss and marched into Austria, which was March the 13th, 1938. The Austrians claimed that there were victims. Let me tell you, there were no victims. As you can see in the picture, how they welcomed Hitler with open arms. The police had to hold them back because they were so happy to have Germany come into Austria. That was the end of the childhood, the way I knew it. Overnight, you become a non-person. In Germany, Hitler was already in power for a few years. So every year another law came out. You couldn't go to school, couldn't go to the university, you couldn't go to a movie, you couldn't even sit in the bench in the park. In Austria, within 24 hours, all those laws were in place. Like I had a girlfriend who was Catholic who lived next door. We were very close friends, went to school together, played together. I used to be in her house helping her decorate the Christmas tree. She liked to be in my house having matzo ball soup. We never had any difference about our religion. We just respected each other. We liked each other's company. But after the Anschluss, after Hitler marched into Austria, she was afraid to talk to me because if somebody would see her together with me, they would denounce her and she would be arrested of being together with a Jewish girl. So everything changed. And then, of course, came Crystal Night, the night of the broken glass, where they burned all the synagogues in Vienna. They burned except one they couldn't burn because it was attached to other houses in a very narrow street. They were afraid the whole block will burn. But they used that synagogue as a stable for the horses. They arrested men and boys sent to concentration camp, looted Jewish businesses. That's why it's called the Night of the Broken Glass. They came into our home, arrested my father, who ended up in Dachau concentration camp, smashed some furniture, and helped themselves to whatever they want. Well, now you would think you could call the police. You couldn't. They were all one of them. There was absolutely nothing you could do. My sister and I were hiding. We're only afraid they shouldn't hurt my mother. My mother realized that she has to save her children. She has to do something to save her children. My brother, who was already in his early 20s, his so-called friends weren't to come for him. So he went to France. He went illegally to Paris. Now, in Europe, you needed identity papers. Of course, he had none. One day, it was the French police who picked him up and asked for papers. As he had none, they were going to send him back. You can just imagine what would happen if they sent him back. So he joined the French Foreign Legion and ended up in Africa. This is the uniform of the French Legion. When during the war, the British came to North Africa, he joined the British Army and was fighting the Nazis. As I said, my mother went from place to place to save her children. Right after Kristallnacht, Hitler waited. How will the world react to what he did? The world was quiet. So Hitler knew he can do what he wants to do. But there was one country who had some compassion. That was England. Right after Kristallnacht, they had a debate in Parliament. What could they do? They decided to take in an unspecified number of children. They had to be under 17 years of age and come alone. And that was called the Kindertransport. Now, December the 2nd, the first Kindertransport went to England until late August, just before war broke out. In 10 months, 10,000 children were saved. 90% of all those children never saw their parents again. I remember my aunt, who had 4 children, having a violent argument with my mother. She called my mother a rotten mother. How can you send your children away? How can you do that? You know, until I became a mother, did I realize they're both right. What does a mother want to do? Hold you close. That's what mothers do. But I truly believe my mother gave birth to me twice. When I was born and when she had the strength and the foresight to send me on the Kindertransport. You know, it's very hard for you to understand what it meant. Today, with social media, television, internet, you know what happens in the world instantly. We didn't have that in 1938. I had no idea where England was. I had to look in a book to look for it. I never met an English person. As far as I'm concerned, England could have been in outer space. So it was very scary, not knowing the language, not knowing who's going to take care of you, and leaving your loved ones behind, what is going to happen to them. I don't remember how many children were there, But there were little ones, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, who had no idea what happened to them. They just cried for their mothers. They grew up with nice boys and girls in England. And if somebody survived and came for them, they couldn't even remember them. We, all the children, took care of the little ones. I remember the day we left. It was March the 13th, 1939. I only remember the date because it was the 1-year anniversary of Hitler marching into Austria. There were parades going on and jubilation. I was in the train, the windows tightly closed. I'm inside, my mother outside. For 4 agonizing hours, the train stood there. I'm looking at my mother. I was afraid to go away from the window. I was afraid I might lose her forever. You know, that was over 80 years ago. To this day, I cannot see anybody seeing me off. I remember on the train, we are trying to be brave and practice the few English words we knew and figuring we might go on an adventure, but we are all scared because we didn't know what is in store for us. And we always worried what happened to the ones we left behind. We were scared. Most children had excellent experiences. The British people really opened their hearts and homes for the children. And most children had wonderful experiences. Some were exploited, like my girlfriend who came to a young couple, had 2 small children, so they used as a nursemaid. But at least we were free. I remember when we traveled to Germany, to Hook of Holland, the Nazis came in. We were only allowed to take a small suitcase, and they yelled at us, if anybody smuggled anything, back you go. But nothing happened. Then we went over to Holland, and we felt free. There were ladies on the platform who gave us sandwiches and hot chocolate. That was the first time I ever saw white bread. I came to an elderly lady, Mrs. Butcher, who wanted me as a companion. We are telling you the story of the Holocaust to show you where hate can lead to. Don't be a bystander. If you see something happen, speak up. If more people would have spoken up, it might have never happened. Be an upstander. You're the next generation. It is up to you. It should never happen to another child again. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, especially hearing those words, that call to action. Be an upstander. It starts with you. Our next survivor is Renee Silver, who was born in the German state of Saarland. During the Holocaust, Renee and her sister were hidden in the Protestant community of Le Chambon, France. Notice the picture above Renee is Andre and Magda Trocame from the Jesuit community who saved over 5,000. We also want to wish Renee a early happy birthday, who is turning 91.
The Holocaust was a descent into hell, in which millions perished in acts aided and abetted by millions, not only in Germany, but in countries defeated and annexed by the Germans. and even in countries far removed, such as the United States, who refused to hear the cries of despair and offer asylum. Yet, there were those who had the courage to care, despite in many cases the danger to their own lives or the lives of their families. In 1945, at war's end, my immediate family, father, mother, my little sister Edith, and I slowly realized that we were the only survivors in Europe. Some family members had emigrated to Brazil and the United States before the war. The rest, my grandfather, my uncles, my aunts, cousins of both parents, had perished in extermination camps. When France was defeated and divided into occupied and unoccupied France, we found ourselves in Villeurbanne, just outside the city of Lyon, in occupied France. This was also known as Vichy France, as the town of Vichy was its capital under the leadership of Maréchal Philippe Pétain. Pétain's first official act was to create a special ministry to deal with la question juive, the Jewish question. Pierre Laval, a virulent anti-Semite, was put in charge of this department. Armies of lawyers went to work to determine who was a Jew and in which ways the Jews would be dealt with. Jews were no longer allowed into certain restaurants, parks, public places. They could not attend special schools for the gifted. Medicine, engineering, and law were closed to them. Concentration camps sprang up all over France. While they were not extermination camps, they were portals to such camps. French police rounded up the Jews. French military guarded them, and French railroads were used to transport them to the extermination camps. When these new edicts became the law of the land, there were a few who stood up and expressed their humanity. The pastor of a small Huguenot community in the Massif Central was one of these giants. André Trocmé was a pacifist. As soon as the new laws were proclaimed, he preached a sermon outside of his temple in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, where in his sonorous voice, he proclaimed, "We shall fight with the weapons of the Spirit." He galvanized not only his immediate flock of parishioners, but with the help of like-minded religious leaders and teachers in the region, enabled a network of rescuers. Some 2,500 people saved the lives of some 5,000 Jewish children and young people. The area where this occurred is somewhat cut off from the rest of France. At the end of the 16th century, during the war between Catholics and Protestants, many Protestants fled France, and many settled on this land, on this hard-to-reach plateau in southwestern France. They were called the Huguenots. In 1942, these Protestants, as well as other Christians in the region, defied the new French laws, risking their own lives and lives of their families. They were sincerely religious, conscious of the sanctity of human life. They followed the laws of the Old Testament, and often the code word for a Jew was an Old Testament. My little sister, then 9, and I, 11, were saved by being taken to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, although we were too young to even know why we were there. We thought we were going there. We were going to the mountains and did not really understand that we were being hidden until it became apparent that we would be separated and were told we could not write to our parents or receive any mail. During that same period, my parents' lives were saved by the actions of individuals who acted entirely on their own. My best friend was Renée Cossidière. Her parents were the janitors of a large municipal complex in Villeurbanne, where we lived. The complex housed a municipal clinic, theater, and swimming pool, as well as municipal offices. The Cossidières had a small apartment in the building. In July 1942, the offices in this municipal complex were used to house the Pétain police, French version of the Gestapo, who had been sent there to round up the Jews in the area. Such roundups were called rafles, meaning raids. They usually took place at night when the victims were more likely to be at home. One morning, Monsieur Cossidière overheard the policemen gleefully announcing to each other, "This is it, we're gonna get them all tonight." He knew exactly what they meant. While he had never met my parents, he knew I was Jewish. He also knew where I lived. Without hesitating one moment, he spoke to his wife and walked over to my parents' apartment. He rang the bell, identified himself, and explained his reason for being there. Without hesitating, my parents followed him to his apartment. Indeed, that very evening, my parents watched as their friends and neighbors were loaded onto trucks and buses across the square from the municipal building where they were hiding. The Cossidières had no church affiliation. They were simply good human beings who recognized their opportunity to save two other human beings' lives. Had they hesitated or deliberated, it would have been too late. I would like to add that my father was totally paralyzed on his left side from a World War I brain injury. Under no circumstance could he have survived a deportation to a concentration camp. His devoted wife, my mother, could not have survived seeing him suffer. Le Chambon is a unique place where members of different Christian faiths, inspired by Pastor André Trocmé, protected, hid, and saved a large number of Jewish children. The Quakers, people like Verian Fry, members of the Unitarian Universalists, also helped. In other parts of France, individuals of the Catholic Church saved numerous lives, creating baptismal certificates and new identities for Jewish children. The distance between the commission of evil and the willingness to turn away and ignore it is not very great in the eyes of the just. To pretend it doesn't or didn't exist is evil too. We are all members of the human race and responsible for each other. Over the temple of the Le Chambon church are inscribed the words, "Aimez-vous les uns les autres, meaning love one another. I would like to finish by quoting Elie Wiesel. Remember, it is easy to save human lives. One did not need to be heroic or crazy to feel pity for an abandoned child. It was enough to open a door, to throw a piece of bread, a shirt, a coin. It was enough to feel compassion. In those days, in those times, one climbed to the summit of humanity by simply remaining human.
Thank you, Renee, and for your call to action. We must love one another, and we must become upstanders. Our final survivor is Werner Reich. Werner and his family were residents of Berlin, Germany. When the Nazis came to power after 2 years in the concentration camp, Werner was sent on the death march. We apologize, we're having some technical difficulty. We'll be right back.
Yugoslavia, and we immediately run into problems because we couldn't speak the language, and my father had to find work. We lived there for 7 years.
Werner, would you mind starting over?
When I was 6 years old, my father, my mother, my sister, and myself left Germany, and we went to Yugoslavia. And the reason we left, that was in 1933, was because Hitler did not permit Jews to have jobs for working for German companies, and didn't allow Jews to go to school. My sister and I, we couldn't go to school. So we went to Yugoslavia, and we had to learn a completely new language and even new handwriting. And we lived there for 7 years. My father was trying to get work as an engineer, but Yugoslavia was basically an agricultural country and was not particularly interested in engineers. After 7 years, my father died, and Germany invaded Yugoslavia, and it became Nazi territory. And my sister and I, we went into hiding. And I was hiding like this. I was hiding with a family who worked for the resistance movement. And for 2 years, of 13 to 15, I was hidden. I was developing films. I was making enlargements. But I certainly did not play with my friends. I couldn't go to school. I couldn't even go out on the street because if you went out on the street, you had to wear a yellow star. And if people saw you with the yellow star, you but most of the time people were hiding. When I was 15, I was arrested by the German secret police. Police station in a small cell with 3 other kids.
Werner, I just found out that your mic isn't working.
Listen, could you put that inside my pocket?
Yes.
Yeah. Put it inside this pocket here.
Your inside pocket?
I think there's a pocket there, is there? Yeah, okay, good.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening.
We'll forget the mic.
Yeah, it's okay, Werner. You can just leave it there.
I don't like it here. I tell you what, when I was suspended here.
It's okay.
Okay, just resume.
When I was 6 years old, my father, my mother, my sister, and I left Jew-hating Germany and we went to Yugoslavia. The reason we went was because my father couldn't work anymore in Germany. As a Jew, he was not permitted to work for German companies. And my sister and I, we were not permitted to go to any school. So we went to Yugoslavia and hoped that things will work out. We had to learn a new language. We had to learn a new handwriting. My father had great difficulty finding work because Yugoslavia was basically an agricultural country and had very little industry that required engineers. But anyway, we lived there very happily for about 7 years. And then my father passed on and Germany invaded Yugoslavia. And we found ourselves suddenly, my mother, my sister, and I, we couldn't escape anywhere because nobody wanted to accept refugees. So we had to find a place of safety. And my mother hid me with a couple who worked for the resistance movement. And for the next 2 years, I was hiding with this couple. I really couldn't go out on the street because I had to wear a yellow star. And once people saw a yellow star, they started spitting at you or they started using foul language. And life was very, very difficult. There were ration cards for people. And as a Jew, you didn't get any ration cards. You couldn't buy any food. But I was hidden like this for 2 years. And after 2 years, I was arrested by the German secret police and I was severely beaten up. I was 15 at that time. And the only crime that I had committed was that I was Jewish. My family had been Jewish, and so had my great-grandparents been. But that was a crime. I was jailed for roughly 6 weeks in various jails and ended up in Graz, Austria, in a police station with 3 other kids who were not Jewish. 2 of them had been arrested for burglary, and the 3rd kid had murdered his mother. And I was the 4th criminal there in that cell. And I was there, as I said, for 6 weeks. And from there, I was shipped to Czechoslovakia. And I spent the next 10 months in a fortress in Czechoslovakia in a concentration camp. From there, I was shipped to Auschwitz. And I spent in Auschwitz probably about 8 months or so. And then the Russians kept advancing. And the winter of 1944-45 came. And it was a very, very severe cold winter. And the Germans were losing the war. And it is then that all the death marches started. Germany had most of its death camps, of the big concentration camps in Poland. And the Germans tried to move the prisoners from Poland to Austria or Germany. And so one day, 60,000 of us from Auschwitz were given a slice of bread and told to start marching. And we walked for about 2 hours and then we stopped. And people sat down on the ground and simply froze to death. The only water that we had was the ice and snow from the road. And we continued like that all day. At the end of the day, we ended up in a big barn. And there were a bunch of cows there. I couldn't find any room whatsoever where to sleep because every bit of the floor was covered with prisoner. The only place that I could find was sleeping between the legs of a cow. And I slept there between the legs of the cow during the night. And the next day, we continued the march. And things got worse. There was no food there. The bread that was given to us was frozen in our pockets. And it was just plain miserable. People kept dying. And the following night, we slept on a silo, on a concrete platform. And the next day, we ended up at a railroad siding. By this time, of the 60,000 people who had left, 15,000 had died. 15,000 dead people along the highway. And we thought, this is the end. We will now be free, but we were not. We were loaded into open railroad cars, open where the wind was blowing as the trains were moving. And we traveled like that for 4 days. After 4 days, we arrived in the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. And those of us who were still alive tried to walk into the camp. And it was very, very difficult because we all suffered from a frostbite. We were taken into the camp and showered. And we all collapsed, screaming with pain. It was the worst pain that I've ever endured in my entire life. After 3 days, my feet started to rot. And there was a prisoner of war who had a knife, and he was a doctor, he cut off my toes on one foot and part of the toes on the other foot and bandaged it up with paper. And that's how he saved my life. But then things got bad because there was no food there. And we ended up having a tablespoon of moldy bread a day. I slept next to a dead man just to get his ration of bread. I slept next to him for roughly 3 days. And then on the 5th of May, 1945, 5 months after we arrived, we were liberated by American forces. We were smelling to high heaven because we haven't washed for over 5 months. We were lying in our feces. We had the same clothing on that we had when we were still in Auschwitz. I met a GI years later, and he said they could smell the camp 10 miles away. And then the American forces had to find medication and food for us, and they didn't have any. There were only military rations, and they fed us these military rations, and about 20,000 people died because there were far too many calories in the food. After about 3 weeks, I was I hitchhiked back home to Yugoslavia, and I found nothing. I found no family. I found no friends. Well, just about all my friends had died during the war. And I was there for 2 years, and after 2 years, I managed to escape to England. And when I came to England, I had a very serious problem because I had no skill, I had no schooling, and I couldn't speak English. So I stayed in England for 9 years. I got married. I came to the States, and I went to college at night, and I got a degree. About 12 million people died during the Holocaust, 12 million people. And the reason they were killed was because of their religion, or because of the color of their skin, or because of their basic beliefs. So the question is, could the Holocaust have been really avoided? And the answer is yes. If the general population would have opened their mouth and objected to what was going on, the Holocaust could have been stopped, but nobody said a word. Dr. Martin Luther King said it best when he said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So if you know of a friend, of somebody who is being bullied, who needs help, please open your mouth. Don't be a silent friend. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about our virtual and in-person programs, please visit us at www.hmtcli.org. You heard all of our survivors' messages. It's about a call to action, being an upstander. Just recently, I received from two teachers, Michael Wasserstein and Julie Bennett of the OJCS school in Ottawa. They shared a story about how a local family from OJCS helped out a pizza joint, which continues to give free pizza out to COVID patients. Recently, the pizza joint was broken into and the glass door was broken. One of the families of OJCS, who owns a glass company, fixed that door, was an upstander. Thank you, Baker family, for being that upstander. Thank you, Michael Wasserstein and Julie Bennett, for teaching your students at OJCS how to become upstanders. We all need to take responsibility and combat injustice. As the late Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of ugliness is not beauty, it's indifference. We must combat this injustice. We must combat indifference. Thank you for joining us today.